Hey everyone, this is the Halifax Real Estate Podcast. My name is Jason Paul and I'm a licensed realtor at Keller Williams Select Realty in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I'm here to help you gain a better understanding of real estate in Halifax and introduce you to a wide variety of people that work in or with our industry as well. Stephen Thompson is a registered home inspector with the Canadian Association of Home Property Inspectors. Stephen runs his own business called Thompson Inspections and brings more than 33 years of experience in engineering, construction, project management, quality assurance, and has built and renovated several homes. Please welcome Stephen Thompson. Hey, Stephen, how are you?
I'm great, Jason. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on today.
It's my pleasure.
So I guess we'll get right into it. Home inspections. So I gotta ask, why home inspections?
Well, for me, as an engineer who's worked for various businesses over the last 33 years in project management and quality assurance, I always felt very strongly that, people are investing a lot of money when they're buying a home, and they deserve to have as much information as possible to help them with a decision. And I've had the experience of being a home buyer and having a not so thorough inspection, and I always vowed that at some point in my life I would become a home inspector and bring a more thorough presence to the business. And for home buyers, an inspection is extremely important because, we've heard, it's the most biggest investment that you're going to make in your life. So obviously, if you're spending that much money on a house, the fraction of the cost to do a home inspection is well worth it to ensure that you're not going to find any surprises or any hidden costs that could ultimately have made the decision not to buy the house.
Of course.
So, I think, there is a Canadian Association of Home and Property Inspectors that is there to represent all home buyers' interests when it comes to home inspectors. The home inspectors that are a member of that association follow a standard of ethics and code of conduct that is paramount to the integrity of the business, and of course there is a very well defined protocol that inspectors must follow when they do home inspections.
Okay, that's amazing. So, what is a home inspection for those of the people that don't know?
So a home inspection is basically looking at the envelope of a home and the contents within that envelope. So we're looking at the structure of the foundation, the siding, the windows and doors, the roof, the landscaping around the home, with all of those things focusing on, preventing water and weather from coming into the home and ensuring that the structure itself is prevented from any water damage. Of course, doing the interior is equally as important, looking at the subsystems that make up the functioning of the home, the electrical system, the plumbing system, the heating and air conditioning systems, the base structure of the floors, insulation, the attic ventilation, all of those things that basically create a healthy home and a home that's safe to live in.
Of course.
So, that whole process is about 2 hours typically to complete. And with that inspection comes a very thorough report that defines all of the conditions that have been observed during the inspection.
Oh, wow. Okay. Now, when someone calls you for an inspection, what can they expect to happen? Like, what do you offer a typical home's owner, a buyer trying to buy a home? Right.
So there are a lot of people, of course, who've never had an inspection done before. So it's very important that a home inspector defines that process that I just gave to you so that the buyer understands what they're paying for. It's very important for me as a home inspector to make sure that people see value in the cost of a home inspection and understand that it's not just the inspection itself, but it's the quality of the report that backs up the findings of the home inspection. So the approach typically should be to advise the client of the costs for the inspection, what the inspection will entail, and what the inspection won't entail. There are things that aren't typically included in a home inspection, such as detached structures, such as a swimming pool, such as a hot tub, a detached garage. These are things that are usually not included in a home inspection, and so it's important that the client understands that. And then, of course, to explain to them what the process will be like as we go through the home, and then what they should expect at the end in terms of a report.
Of course. Okay. So what's the first, what are you looking for when you go into a home? Are you I know you're expecting every detail of the home, but are you looking for anything specific when you go into let's say a roof, for example?
Yeah, all homes are not built equally, and of course, we see a wide variety of styles of homes and ages of homes, and so the most important thing that we're looking for when we walk into a home, as I say, is the foundation. What is supporting this home that makes this home suitable to live in? The water issues that we talked about earlier, whether it's through the roof or through the foundation or through the windows and doors, is all fixable. It's all things that can be remedied, but in some cases that remedy might exceed what the buyer is willing to spend. So it's very important that we discuss the not only the issue that we see, but also the remedy and the potential cost involved. So a roof, as an example, if we see a roof that has shingles that are severely deteriorated, and that roof may require replacement in the next, say, 3 to 5 years, it's important, A, that the client understands that, and B, what the risk is by not doing it, and C, what the cost potential would be.
Yeah, of course, because you have to know so a buyer has to know what they're getting involved in.
Yeah, and there are people who have perhaps only lived in apartments and never had to face the issues of owning a home and the maintenance that comes with that. So it's equally important that when we do a home inspection, we discuss those maintenance concerns, because those maintenance concerns are going to be a cost, whether it's the homeowner doing those maintenance projects or they're hiring someone to do the work. It still is a cost. And so, a home inspection should discuss all of the maintenance concerns that come with that home.
Yeah, of course. So like in terms of maintenance, we're looking at, the furnace, for example, or a heat pump, how to service these things and make sure that they're fully functional when you go away a year later.
That's right. And it's interesting too, because there are situations where a home doesn't have, for example, a heat pump, which is obviously something you hear a lot about today in home inspections and home purchases, is, well, I'd like to install a heat pump. How much would that cost? Can we do it? And there's some cases where maybe it's not cost effective to install a heat pump if the electrical system, for example, doesn't support it, and the buyer is on a restricted budget. It may be best for them to remain with the heating system that they have. Having said that, there are some great incentive programs that are being offered through Efficiency Nova Scotia to support the cost of something like a heat pump. What I try to do is explain, what the system involves, whether it's a heat recovery ventilator or a heat pump or an oil-fired furnace or boiler, and what the pros and cons to each of those systems are, so that they have enough information and ammunition to make that decision. We're not salespeople to sell one product over another or to recommend one product or another. Our role is simply to point out what the conditions are of the existing systems, and if they have the resources and the interest, what possible changes they could make with that system.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. It's information.
Information
That's all we're trying
key.
to do. Yeah, of course. It's just trying to make sure that people are educated about the process. Now, when you have a first-time home buyer, this question comes up all the time. Do we need to be there, or should we be there? Do we and I always say, listen, you're spending $250,000 on a fancy box. I think you should be there. How important is it to have the buyers there on site when you're doing your inspection?
I love your recommendation that the client should be present. I do get that question as well, and I absolutely encourage the client to be part of this process. It's one thing to see pictures in a report or to have a discussion with the client after the inspection. There's nothing like being there. As they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words, but being present and being able to see in 3D what the concern or the issue is means everything to the client. And it's also a way to interact and have, a sort of more fruitful conversation about those issues. There are cases where a client can't be present. They're out of province and they simply can't come. Or, of course, in today's world, COVID has really made it difficult for clients to come from out of province simply to, view homes with realtors, and then, of course, to do a home inspection. So Lately, it's been more common to do inspections without the client present, but as a rule, it's always better to have them as part of that process.
For out of town buyers, now you got me now you got me wondering. Is there any? Do you film the inspection and maybe send them a clip of the video? Because like I've done viewings like that where I walk through the home with a phone, or maybe even like I have a GoPro, so I do it with the GoPro and we'll take the video and send them a clip. Do you guys do that as well?
Yeah, we don't get questions from clients to do that, but oftentimes I'll have the realtor ask me if it's okay to either film as I'm going through the inspection process, which, that can be an hour and a half to 2 hours long. That's a lot of video.
10-minute clips each section of the house.
Yeah, what I prefer to do is to complete the inspection and then to go back through and video just those areas that are of concern.
Oh, that's a
so
great
that way
idea.
it sort of shortens the time frame. It keeps the focus of the video, to a short list, and still gives the client the opportunity to ask questions about those things that we've discovered through the inspection.
Yeah.
So that's become popular. Zoom discussions, obviously, post report. So once the client reviews the report, there are typically questions that come up as well. So that's an effective tool. It's definitely very different this year than it has been in previous years in terms of how inspectors are interacting with their clients.
It's a lot more fun.
It's a lot more fun. It can be a lot more challenging as well.
Now, as an inspector, and I get this question all the time when I get someone buying a condo. Should people get their condominium inspected?
Wow, there's a loaded question. So, obviously you're asking an inspector who is somewhat biased with respect to the response I'm going to give you.
I would argue biased. I would argue well informed.
Thank you. It is important for any client, as we said earlier, if you're buying a $250,000 fancy box, whether it's a condo or a home, to ensure that you're making the right decisions when you ultimately decide to sign off on that. And a condo is no different than a home in terms of the interior content and systems. The big difference, of course, is that we're not looking at the exterior conditions of the facility because that's included under the condo corporation responsibility. I do recommend that a condo be inspected, and I have seen many issues with condos related to water infiltration, for example, safety issues within the condo, because the condos are under the control of the owner. The owner has the full responsibility and right to do whatever they wish within the contents of their building.
Exactly.
And so oftentimes we can find owner changes that perhaps aren't compliant or have some concerns.
DIYs.
Yes.
And it's funny how often that question comes up is in terms of getting a condo inspected. And I ask this because let's say I've done this before with you in a sense of I've given you the condo documents beforehand. Do you look at the reserve fund study and what that is projected for later inspections? Like say they're doing the underground parking again, or like some areas need repaving. Do you look at that as well when you inspect a condominium?
It's rare that I see that information before I do an inspection, so I guess the direct answer would be no.
Okay.
If that information is shared with me by the agent, obviously it impacts the discussion that we have with the client.
Yeah.
I always look for information regarding disclosure from a homeowner to the realtor, because that helps me to understand concerns that may or may not be apparent to me during the inspection. Things like, was the roof replaced, recently? Have there been new windows added? Have there been any repairs to the foundation? Those things are all relevant to me because I want to know if those repairs or that work has been done properly. So that kind of information is very helpful.
When you say the disclosure statement, you obviously mean the proper disclosure statement, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so for those of you that don't know this, proper disclosure statement when you're buying a house is something you request from the sellers. And it's a disclosure statement where the sellers talk about everything and anything that they know is wrong with the house beforehand. So let's say that they had a furnace repair done recently. That will be listed. If they also have the option to check do not know. So they might be insulation in the attic and they might check do not know because they might not know what kind of insulation it is. But that is there as a disclosure statement, and it's filled out and signed by the seller. So it's a legally binding document, if you were just to give a little heads up as to what Stephen's talking about. And if you are buying a house, I do recommend asking for a copy. And if no one is not available, when you are writing an offer to buy a house, include that in your conditions. and make it available, because that document for your inspection is a crucial detail, as well as any condominium documents as well. Giving the inspector, I imagine, as you would agree, as much information as possible before we're going in the door is the best thing for you as well as the client.
100%. I'm glad that you've explained that to your listeners, because that is a document that is very useful in so many regards, obviously in terms of purchase, but also for me as an inspector to help me understand, whether the client has been doing maintenance and upkeep on the home or not. So yeah, I always will ask for that.
Moving on to the next thing. Is there anything you can't see in an inspection? Is there anything you can't find? Is there something that you are not allowed to do in an inspection, right? Because someone's typically paying X amount of dollars to go in and have you look at this house from a third-person perspective and tell them what a list of criteria that may need upkeeping. So what can't you see as an inspector?
The things that an inspector is looking for are what we call patent defects. So these are things that the eyes can see. So they're present. They're not hidden behind a wall. They're not something that requires X-ray vision, as some people think we have to see a defect. So really, what an inspector is looking for are what we call latent defects. And these would be things like stains, for example, on the baseboards of a basement room, which would indicate that there has been moisture present at some point in time, and that we need to dig deeper to see, is there still moisture present at the present time? What could have caused that? Is it a potentially leaking foundation? Is it a flood that happened? Has a window been left open? Those types of things. So we want to dig deeper when we do see these latent defects. But things buried behind walls, if there's poor plumbing or if there's a junction box that's been hidden behind a wall which doesn't meet code, those things aren't going to be revealed in inspection because we simply can't see them. There are tools to further investigate things like moisture. For example, we can do moisture testing using something called a moisture meter, and that helps us to understand if this moisture is from the past or it's still occurring. Infrared thermography can be used to determine if there are potential water leaks from plumbing, for example, in a ceiling or an in-floor heating system that might not necessarily be so significant that they present themselves as stains or damage to the drywall or floors, but yet are still present. But that is a technology that requires specialized training in order to be able to understand and read the thermographs correctly. And then there are a number of other tools that are used to test for things like the electrical integrity of the home and functionality of systems like heating systems and electrical systems.
Of course. You brought up something that is kind of nuanced, but I want to dig into it. Code and grandfathering, because we see that a lot, particularly on the Halifax Peninsula, in a sense of something was built in the 1920s, 1930s, 40s, pick a decade, not recent. And we go in with you as an inspector, and we'll hear the words, "This is not up to code, but it's grandfathered." So what does that actually mean when something has been grandfathered?
So there's the National Building Code, which is a Canadian building code, and it changes over time as new information becomes evident with respect to safety concerns. Decks would be a good example. Electrical systems, for example. Ground fault circuit interrupters, which are a protective device that's required by sinks. Those things have evolved over time because there's been safety concerns with homes. So if you turn the clock back to the early 1900s, there was never any grounded receptacles in a home. In fact, there was a wiring called knob and tube wiring that was used, which has since been determined to be not safe and, in fact, can't be insured. So, experience has told us and taught us that there are things that we know now that if we had known back then, we would have changed. So a home inspector is not considered a code inspector. We're told not to use the word code, although I just did. We're told to reference standards. The reality is that when a home is under construction, there is a building inspector who does refer to building codes and ensures that the plumbing is presented to the current building code and that the electrical is done to the current electrical code and the insulation and windows and doors and so forth are done accordingly. An inspector is coming into a home that might have been lived in for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, And so we can't see the wiring behind the walls, and we can't see how the plumbing was installed. That's all preceded us. So we're really only looking at the conditions of the home as they exist at the time of the inspection. So when we reference codes or standards, we're referring to what is the current code or current standard. So grandfathering is something that we talk about a lot in home inspections regarding the acceptance of, say, a short handrail or a window that doesn't meet egress or a receptacle that's not a ground fault circuit interrupter next to a sink. So really it's important to understand the age of the home and what building code was applicable at the time the house was built. The difference is that if you're doing a renovation to a home and you're making a significant change, then the most current building code comes into play. And the most current building code today is 2015. So that's what an inspector would reference if there was a situation where a home was built since 2015 or if there was a renovation that has been done since 2015. So grandfathering is a word that sometimes is misunderstood, and it's sort of viewed by some as a way to say, well, I don't have to worry about that. I always tell my clients, look, if it's something that's improved the safety of the home or the quality of the construction, why not consider it anyhow? If you can make that home safer, whether it's an older home that precedes the code or not, the code's changed to make things better in the home, so consider it.
I couldn't agree more. Now, is it a concern when you're in a home? Now, I'm just thinking from a buyer's perspective. So we're in a home and we find out that maybe the deck is grandfathered, for example. Would that be a concern, and is that something we should negotiate on? I know the answer, but for people that may want to know, how is that situation be handled?
That's a fantastic question. Decks is a really good subject that we could talk about for a long time. Everybody, of course, feels that they can build a proper deck, but the reality is that unless you understand the current building standards, that's not going to happen. So any good inspector is going to point out anything on a deck that doesn't meet today's building standard for decks. And that's things as simple as 6x6 columns supporting the deck, to how the deck is anchored to the home, to the railing height. And if any of those things, regardless of the age of the deck, don't meet today's building standard, they would certainly want to be brought up by the home inspector to the buyer. Because at the end of the day, Jason, what we want to do is create the safest environment for the home. So why wouldn't we bring up an issue like a short railing or a deck that's nailed to a house instead of screwed to a house as things that could be improved? Because that's our goal at the end of the day, is to make the home safe and to make sure that the buyer is aware that there are things that can be done to improve the conditions. Exactly.
Now, I do know from my own experience in terms of grandfathering. Now, let's say a deck is stable and safe. The screws are in, but maybe the foundation, the 6x6 you're talking about, isn't up to standard code. Clients don't have to do anything about that if it's safe standing until they were to renovate it. Correct?
Correct. Anytime you begin a renovation, the renovation is done under the current building code.
Yeah, so that's part of anything. So if someone wanted to update the electrical and it was a knob and tube, let's just say someone did that, they would have to bring up the entire electrical to that code.
Correct. And good luck finding an insurance company that would insure a home with knob and tube.
Maybe they might not want it insured. We don't know what they want to do with it. It might be a demo job.
Could be something for a museum.
I mean, knob and tube is, one of the many causes.
There are always these great discussions around things that sometimes are misunderstood, like knob and tube wiring or asbestos insulation or aluminum or Kitec. Some of these words strike the fear of God in buyers. And so it's extremely important for the inspector to make sure that they explain why these things are of a concern, but not to alarm the buyer to the point where that one particular topic drives them away from the house when 99% of the home is absolutely fine.
Fear of God is the correct term. There's nothing like watching the whites of a buyer's eyes when someone mentions the word asbestos, even if it's insulation, which is perfectly safe until it's disturbed.
100%. And this is one of the things that I will tell my clients, is that asbestos is actually a great product, still is a great product. We just happen to know a lot more about its health effects now than we did 40, 50 years ago. And so handling asbestos is what we worry about most. Left undisturbed, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a condominium building on Spring Garden Road that has asbestos in the ceiling.
Interesting.
But it's completely fine. They're popcorn ceilings, so if you want to get them changed, though, you have to redo the whole ceiling and bring in an asbestos team to remediate that.
For our audience, why don't you explain what a popcorn ceiling is?
A popcorn ceiling is that lovely dated ceiling everyone loves when they take the plaster or sponge, I believe, and they somehow manage to twist the sponge to create that small circular effect on the ceiling, and it's so aesthetically pleasing, and every modern home should have it, and every buyer wants it because it's the best thing ever. Please, if you cannot hear my sarcasm.
It's certainly an art to generate a ceiling that has some sort of texture or stipple or popcorn look to it, and it's not for everyone. But in terms of a home inspection, that would be something that we would not comment on.
Yeah, of course, not the aesthetics.
That has nothing to do with the quality of the home.
I always, whenever I'm getting ready for an inspection, be it with you or another inspector in general, I always let my clients know that it's actually your job to identify what is wrong with the home. And I always say there's no problem we can't solve except foundation and water. Would you agree, or were there other issues that you would think would be more we should be concerned about? Because I just think foundation and water are the two most crucial things in a home.
Yeah, I think as I alluded to at the beginning of our conversation, the inspector is always concerned about water infiltration into a home.
Yeah.
And so whether it's through the roof, through the windows and doors, or through the foundation, it's a concern. And the reason it's a concern is obviously it will damage the contents of the home as well as the structure. I tell my clients that, every home is going to have some problems. It's just a question of whether they're minor or major problems or cosmetics. We sometimes use the word. But the reality is every problem can be fixed, but it has a price tag associated with it. So to your point, a foundation repair, if it's a significant repair, can be very expensive. In cases where the foundation is cracked so badly that it's not repairable, we could be spending $30,000, $40,000 to replace a foundation. So it's extremely important that, in the course of carrying out the inspection, those things that are of major concern are discussed before spending any more time in the home, because quite frankly, that might be a stopping point for the inspection. If we see a foundation that's damaged so badly that the costs are going to far outweigh what the buyer is considering paying for this house or adding as improvements, that may be a showstopper. So, those are the most major concerns: water damage and foundation cracks or gaps. They're all repairable, but it's a question of cost.
Yeah. First thing I'll say is, for those of you that don't know, home inspectors start in the basement and at the foundation. So if you have a bad foundation, your inspection might be 15 minutes long, and that will be a showstopper. Secondly, what are signs of a bad foundation? What are some a way you can tell when you're going in? Because before you even get there, we have to view the home, and then we have to negotiate and accept an offer, and then you come in for conditions. So if there's a way for clients to have a look for the viewing process, or even myself, because I might miss it, what are some signs of a bad foundation?
Wherever you have changes in a foundation level, so what we call step foundations, so a foundation that's built on a hill typically, there are always going to be stresses at those points where the foundation changes elevation. So first step I would tell a buyer is to look at those points in the foundation where there's changes in elevation to see if there's any cracks. Another thing is if a basement window has been cut in or formed into the foundation. That's also a probable stress point in the foundation. So what we're really looking for is, A, is there a crack? And B, what's the size of the crack? How big is the void? Does it look like it extends below the surface? Because again, we're only looking at what we can see above grade. And then of course, when we do identify a crack, to also relate it to the interior and see if we can find any signs of moisture. If it's a finished basement, any signs of moisture on the drywall or finish that's on the interior wall. And if it's exposed, of course, we look for that crack to see if there's any signs of puddling, water stains, or anything at the base of that crack.
Okay. Now, the cracks, because cracks can be from the settling of a home, because for those of you that don't know, a home can take up to 60 years to settle. And if you have a climate like Halifax is where we go have our winters, where the ground freezes and thaws like ours, how we have those wonderful snowstorms followed by the 6-degree days the next day. A lot of shifting can happen, and those cracks can take place because they're settling. Is there a difference between a settling crack and a foundation crack?
So you have the issue of frost that causes heaving or movement, and you have hydraulic pressure from the exterior wall of the foundation wanting to push that water to the interior wall where there's a void, where there's nothing supporting the wall. And so the whole purpose behind the foundation, of course, is to act as a support structure for the home, but also as a water barrier to any moisture that's contained in the soil on the outside. So all foundations will have some kind of water barrier material, whether it's foundation coating or a membrane, to stop that from occurring. But of course, we have rocks in the soil that's used as backfill against the foundation, and that can damage that coating and cause leakage. It's very common to see moisture in a basement just based on the fact that we're below grade. So the area is cooler, we've got warm air within the home, so there's the potential for condensation. So I always recommend that a basement have a dehumidifier to control the moisture in the basement. But in terms of, is house A versus house B more likely to have foundation problems, is very much dependent on, the construction of the foundation, the quality of the concrete that went into the pour, how many cold joints there are, because when you pour a foundation, you don't pour it as one instant pour. It's done in stages. So everywhere where one pour stops and the next pour starts is called a cold joint. And how well those cold joints are blended together impacts the quality of the foundation. There's a whole science behind concrete and the way in which it should be prepared and installed for a foundation. People who pour foundations in minus 15-degree weather, concrete has water in it, and water freezes. So it's really important that foundation is protected from freezing, or we have defects in the foundation. So there's a lot of
nuance
that go into a foundation, correct?
Yeah. Water, my favorite topic. When we're in a home, what are some evidence? What is evidence of water? If you, just in case we might see, just in case we're looking around a kitchen or a new bathroom renovation, what are some evidence that we can look for that will show us water or that exists where it's not supposed to?
So the obvious one, of course, is the base of the foundation, because it's the lowest point in the house. We have the most hydraulic pressure trying to push water through the foundation wall into the home. Inspectors will always look at the base of the foundation walls, whether they're finished or not finished, to see signs or evidence of water infiltration. There's something called efflorescence, which is the salts that are present in the concrete being moved by water passing from the exterior of the foundation to the interior. So if you see sort of a white fuzziness on the interior wall, that's an indication that there is some moisture migrating into the basement. Other areas where it's typical that you might see moisture would be underneath sinks, where the traps that hold the wastewater could be leaking. The joints are leaking. And it's not uncommon to see that. Sometimes it's a loose fitting, sometimes it's a poor installation. Plumbing connections themselves, hot and cold water connections, sometimes will leak. Sometimes rural properties on wells have very acidic water, and that acidic water can actually cause the copper plumbing in the home to corrode. And we see periodically pinholes in the water piping, which of course presents itself as a stain in the ceiling or wall wherever the piping is present. So there are a number of areas, and of course the last one would be the roof, and obviously an older roof that's leaking will present itself as paint delamination on the ceiling underneath, or if it gets to the point where it's been neglected, actual damage to the drywall.
And mold. Water will always bring mold with it. Yeah. I mean, it's such but water, as you mentioned earlier, there's a way to catch it with the moisture meter to look behind these things if there is evidence. Soft drywall would be a great way. Paint peeling on the wall was another great spot in case. But also keep in mind that just because there is a soft drywall and if there is a paint peeling on the wall, it doesn't necessarily mean water behind the wall. There is always another explanation. And that's what the moisture meter is for, is to determine whether or not water is present.
That's right. And so, a lot of times we don't know the history of repairs that have been done to the home. So, if I do see, say, rippled or wrinkled paint, that's usually an indication that there's been a water leak. But it might have been because the bathroom sink above, or the toilet would be a better example, the toilet above has leaked. It's overflowed.
Yeah.
One-time event, the toilet's plugged, it's overflowed, the water went down to the ceiling beneath, we see this paint sort of slumped and wrinkled. That may be the only time, and so the owner may not have repaired that. They've repaired or fixed the toilet, obviously, but they've opted not to repair the ceiling. So the best that an inspector can do is to tell you if that's a present leak, if it's something that's still active, or it's something that happened in the past. And of course, we can always ask the homeowner, we see a problem with your ceiling, looks like there's a leak. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Please do not be afraid to ask a homeowner for an explanation on a home that you're inspecting. It usually is something innocent. It's very rarely something sinister in a sense of it's worse than you think. It's usually something like Stephen has just claimed where a toilet overflowed and there's a little bit of peeled. Have an open dialogue. Make sure you're asking the right questions that come up during an inspection. You're spending $250,000 on a fancy box. Please find out as much information as you can before you decide to buy it. Moving forward, though, this question comes up way more than it should. And once again, you are biased, but I want to know from an inspector's point of view, should you inspect or would you inspect new home construction?
100% yes, I would inspect new home construction. The reality is that there are homes being put up at a very rapid rate with large constraints in terms of getting these homes finished for the buyer. And so unlike a factory where you might be producing laptops or light bulbs or what have you, and there is a set of procedures to follow, and there's a quality control department that's doing random tests on the product coming off the assembly line, houses are one-offs. It doesn't matter. Even if the builder's building what we consider to be cookie-cutter homes, they're all unique in their own way. And builders typically don't have quality insurance inspectors going around and checking the quality of the trim and the quality of the paint and the quality of the plumbing and the quality of the electrical. So it's really up to the trade that's doing the work to be sort of self-evaluating. And the only other person beyond the buyer coming into that home typically that's going to be critical about the quality of that work is the home inspector. So it's very important, in my opinion, to have a new home inspected for all of those reasons. And I've been in new homes where there have been cracked foundations, there have been leaking windows, there's been plumbing that wasn't hooked up. Nothing deliberate, of course, but just in the pace of our life, things get missed or forgotten. And so the best time to find those things is before the purchase, that you have the most weight and the most influence at that stage in your purchase decision.
Yes, because then you can renegotiate. If you find out after and you firmed, if your conditions have been met and you're firm, you can't go back to the table. You will, if you want to walk away, you'll lose the deposit, which you can. You can still get out of the deal. It's just you won't be able to renegotiate if you find out something that's happened after those dates or even after you move in. It's long gone. Money's been transferred and out of your hands. Is there anything you wouldn't inspect? I know that's a tricky question.
That is a loaded question, Jason. So, as I said earlier,
it's okay to be biased. We understand.
I know where your question's leading. I mentioned detached structures and things that aren't connected to the home. I would not inspect as a rule. I've inspected some very interesting buildings over my career. Quite frankly, I don't think that I would say honestly that there's anything that I wouldn't inspect, but there are challenges with inspecting structures or buildings that perhaps have not followed any standard, because then what is the standard that you're evaluating against? And a perfect example of that would be a shed. There are lots of sheds that homeowners build, and they've used their own standard. So it's very difficult as a home inspector to evaluate that when you don't have a standard to use in that case.
Of course.
But yeah, I think in general terms, any detached structure or swimming pool or gazebo or things like that that's not connected to the home would not be part of an inspection.
No, but you can still tell if it's a safe staying structure, right? Like you can have a look at it and say, okay, this will stand tall.
Right. And that's typically what I do is I will make comment on is it elevated above ground so we're not going to have wood rot, for example? Does the profile of the roof look stable and secure? Are there any concerns with the electrical if it's been electrified? What is the general condition of the siding, windows, doors, and roof? But that stuff generally won't go in the report. It's a verbal discussion with the client.
Of course, because the report is there for the home and what's
Correct.
wrong and what is great and or deficient about a home. Because sometimes, and this does happen, a home inspection does go well.
And you mentioned earlier that one of the roles of the home inspector is to find conditions or deficiencies in the home. I like to always make sure that the homeowner also understands when there are things that have been done by the builder that go above or beyond what we would consider to be normal in construction. It could be something as simple as the way they manage their water being shut off the property. It could be crown moldings, which are considered to be, in my opinion at least, a value-added feature in the home that's not typical. So I always like to balance whatever it is that I see as a home inspector that might need improvement or change with those things that are actually unique and of additional value to the home.
There is nothing better than inspecting a home that a homeowner takes pride in. There's nothing that shows better. There's no better privilege than to see a homeowner take pride. We were in a home back in May, and the homeowner did all these repairs. He did his own maintenance, and he left sticky notes on all the work he did, saying this was done at this date at this time. And they were like, the sticky notes had smiley faces, and he had a backsplash made out of stone. And sticky notes that touched the stone. They were just. And the inspection went great. There was one problem with it, but that's fine. We negotiated on that. I mean, we still bought the house, but like that pride of ownership is such a great thing when you see it, when you're even in a home, and especially for the home inspector, I can only imagine how great it is to go into a home and say, okay, these guys have clearly maintained their home, which goes to my next thing. After someone has bought a home, do you give any sort of education, or can you give any sort of education in terms of maintaining the home? Because one of the biggest fears I find with buyers, particularly first-time home buyers, is they think I don't know how to take care of a home. It's so much money to take care of a home. When in reality, it's just upkeeping on little things that if you don't add up over time. So I guess going back to my original question is, do you help teach homeowners how to maintain their property?
We aren't called home educators or home teachers. We're called home inspectors. But I wish that we could somehow put that extra bit on our name, because I really think that's as equally important a role that a home inspector carries, is to do the educational component. So absolutely, I feel it's a role that every home inspector should take in terms of helping the buyer understand what maintenance they're going to be faced with. Is it filter changes on a heat recovery ventilator or a forced air furnace? Is it, how do I clean those windows? I show them how the window can be cleaned from the inside instead of the outside. Is it filter changes on the exhaust hood for the range? Some people don't realize that there are filters there. Some people don't realize that there's some exterior maintenance that has to be done.
Heat pumps.
The list is really not that big. But it is so important that the work's done. I don't say that you have to do it as a homeowner or a home buyer, but it needs to be done. So you make the choice if you're capable and confident to do that properly, or if you're actually having to hire a professional to do it. And I did want to go back to your earlier point about, the general feel that a home inspector gets when they walk into a house, like your gentleman with the sticky notes. When an owner takes pride in a house, it's very apparent to a home inspector. It's instantly obvious as we go through the home if this house has been properly maintained or if it's been neglected. Things like just seeing owner manuals out on the table says that homeowner has done a good job of keeping records. Seeing a service record on a furnace that says 2020 tells me the furnace has been serviced this year and it should be serviced every year. All that stuff is a feel-good kind of situation for a home inspector. So I point that out to the home buyer and make sure that they understand why, this home has a good feel to it.
I couldn't agree more. Being able to walk into a home that someone plans on buying and realizing that, the turnover from seller to buyer is going to be relatively smooth. And please don't be please don't be caught up in the fact that maybe a homeowner has taken good care of a home. Still get it inspected, because there may be something that they missed. It just happens. Some things get neglected. whether it's as small as a septical in a kitchen that needs to be changed, or sometimes like a roof maybe has a deficiency and there has been a little bit of water in there and it shows a light early stage of mold. That can be remediated at a very low minimal cost, and your home inspector is there to tell you that. One of the things I love about you is that, as well as you being a very good home inspector, is that you're also an engineer. And when I have a client that wants to tear down a wall or take a 1970s home and open up the room, I can bring you in as an inspector and have my client ask you, hey, can we do this? So how, when it comes to taking down walls, how great is it? It's so great to be able to get you out. How can you help someone that wants to open up a floor?
So that's a very important question. I do get that a lot from home buyers, because obviously people are constantly looking for ways to improve the space and open the space. And so that's probably one of the more common questions I get is this a load-bearing wall? Is this a structural wall? Is this a wall that I can remove without adding any sort of additional structure to the home? Sometimes that's very obvious, and sometimes it requires a specialist, such as a structural engineer or a contractor that has structural experience, to come in. As an engineer, I know what I need to look for with respect to spans, so meaning the distance between support columns in the house or the distance between the engineering trusses that are up in the roof. And so homeowners will always get shy when it comes to a response like, you can remove it, but, and the but is you have to put a carrying beam to support the ceiling above the point where you want to remove the wall. And quite frankly, that should not scare people away. There is always an added cost, obviously, to add something in where you've removed something, because removing is fun. That's where you get the big sledgehammer out and you just start removing studs and
Demo day
drywall.
is the best day.
It's a lot of fun. But we have to remember that we've got to worry about what's above it. And so that would have to be engineered. The size of the beam required to carry the load for the ceiling or structure that's being supported by that wall, if it's what we call a load-bearing wall, would have to be engineered. And quite frankly, I would never tell a client that they can't remove a wall. The only thing is, if it appears to be a load-bearing wall, they have to consider the cost for that load-bearing beam that's going to carry that weight.
And does that beam, does it vary in prices? I imagine the size of the beam.
It does. So it's really a game based on the span. So if the wall's 4 feet wide or 6 feet wide versus 10 or 12 feet wide, the length and size of the beam is going to increase.
Of course.
And so it goes up with that. The basic installation of the beam doesn't change. It's simply the material cost.
What are your thoughts on sellers getting their home pre-inspected before they hit the market?
Well, there you go. That's a debate that we could talk about for some time. I have people say, why would I get my home pre-inspected when it's going to be inspected anyhow? A lot of times I find pre-inspections are valuable to those homeowners who are either on a very tight time frame and don't want to entertain a lot of people coming through their house and a lot of potential anxiety created by that. Or they simply just want to know where their house stands in terms of concerns or issues that might impact the value of their home. I personally think it's a great idea to do a pre-inspection on a home, because it helps the owner put things in perspective and understand, what issues they may be faced with when the buyer does bring in a home inspector, what costs there may be, so that they can, again, appropriately price their home, or if they choose to address those issues that are brought up during the pre-inspection, get them done, so that essentially they're not dealing with a lot of negotiating. And I would find probably the majority of my clients that want to do pre-inspections are in that last category. They simply don't want to go through the negotiating phase on pricing on the house. They want to say, this house has been pre-inspected, there have been issues identified, and ideally the inspector that's coming through to represent the buyer is going to see a very small list at the end of that inspection.
I couldn't agree more. When I'm going to list a home, I always try to get the home pre-inspected. In this market that we're in Halifax right now, it's harder to do because things are selling so quickly and competing offers is so aggressive that it is not necessary. I still like to do it because I call it the path of least resistance, in terms of if you're competing against a few other homes on your street, and none have been pre-inspected, but yours has, and you can disclose that, and you can disclose what you know as a deficiency, you can either fix it early and state that you fixed it, or let the client or let the potential buyer know that we've adjusted our price for this issue and we are aware of it. So please don't come back in negotiations on inspections and try to negotiate down when we've already adjusted our price for this problem to begin with. Because I know when I'm buying a house with a client, we always have an agreed price. I promise you, more often than not, we will find something in the inspection that gets at least $1,000 or something off the price. It happens every time. You can always agree a price, but when you go through inspections, more often than not, one or two things come up, whether it's in the sewer line or the home inspection itself, and we can always negotiate down. I always tell my clients who are getting ready to sell, get it pre-inspected and take the bullets out of their gun. Because if you could disclose everything early or fix it early, then they're going to come in, you're going to negotiate a price when they write the first offer, and you know what they're going to find in the inspection. And you don't have to go back to the table.
I agree with all those points, Jason. I did mean to also say that one advantage that a pre-inspected house has over a non-pre-inspected house is the building of confidence. The buyer is looking at that house and saying, hey, that house has already been inspected. Obviously, I'm going into a situation which perhaps won't have as many surprises as a home that has had no inspection previously.
Of course. And another thing I would recommend is if you do have your home pre-inspected, make the report accessible. If you have buyers coming in, just send them the report and let them know, hey, we've done this work. This is what's going on. This is what we know is a deficiency. Because you might not have to fix everything. Maybe the floorboards need to be replaced, but you don't want to do it. We'll disclose that and just adjust the price. You can take $1,000 or $2,000 off your home list value and say, hey, we're adjusting for this, so please don't negotiate down for this problem. You're getting a discount for it, we know. And that, I think that, like you say, peace of mind is everything, because when you do that up front, you give the buyers a little more confidence that you are taking care of your home and you're disclosing everything wrong with it that you know of, and you've done your due diligence, which only brings the confidence, more peace of mind to purchase your home.
I think that element of transparency by sharing the things that perhaps have been repaired or done in the home, by sharing any warranties that there might be on a roof that's recently been done, by sharing the pre-inspection report, the buyer's going to think, hey, this owner really is being upfront with me. There's nothing that's being hidden. Unfortunately, we're still in a world where either people forget to disclose things or sometimes they're not so open about some of the things that have been done in the home. And we don't want the buyer to be frightened by things like that.
You don't want anyone to catch anything, a whiff of something wrong. The one thing I always tell both the buyer and our seller when I'm working with either, a deal doesn't happen unless both the buyer and seller are satisfied. Whatever those terms are. If maybe a seller might be okay with taking a $15,000 price reduction. Maybe they won't be. But however a deal crosses the line, both parties are typically happy because something that they wanted was served. Maybe a seller had to be in a different part of the country in 2 weeks, so they had a price really low to get that home sold. They got it sold. That means there's nothing wrong with the house. They just had a set of criteria that had to be met, and they got it met. That is something that sometimes gets lost in translation when you're dealing with a home buyer or even a home seller, when it's about making both parties happy. And a pre-inspection and disclosing everything up front is a great way to make sure everyone's happy and on the same page. And that's why we always recommend a pre-inspection.
And the other thing that I feel important is that when you do a pre-inspection on a home, I've been asked, would you pre-inspect the foundation, or would you pre-inspect the roof, or pre-inspect the windows? That's not really, being fair to either the buyer who's going to be coming into that house, or quite frankly to the inspector, because I can't ignore, if I'm coming into a house and I'm being asked to inspect the windows, but I see something else that's a concern, I can't walk away and ignore that. So my approach to the pre-inspection is I inspect the home to the same level of thoroughness and detail as if it was the buyer's inspection.
You have to. If we're bringing an inspector to a job and to tell us about the home, you have to do your job from top to bottom. Because what are your heavy hitters? Foundation, roof. I don't understand you could ever look those over and why you'd ever want to. Some people are scared of the unknown, and I find that conversation comes up more often than not, where the seller is hesitant to do a home inspection or even a sewer line inspection because they think to themselves, well, that hasn't been inspected in X amount of years. Maybe I haven't been taking care of it. I don't want to turn over leaves. And I always say, well, would you rather turn over leaves yourself or would you rather leave it up to a buyer? Because I promise you, if a buyer turns over the leaf, they're going to come back with a price reduction. And that quote could be pulled out of thin air by someone else that they know, which happens more often than you think. Or that quote could be brought in by a professional, but that professional might overcharge. There are so many variables to go into that when you want to do your due diligence first, do the home inspection, understand, and give yourself peace of mind that you know what's going on. Because when you go to sell, putting the best foot forward and giving yourself the best confidence to sell that home versus your competition, because you are in competition. Your competition is the house next door. Your competition is the house across the street. And saying we've been pre-inspected, our foundation's rock solid, our roof has another 5 to 8 year lifespan, our windows, we have 2 broken seals, we'll give you a rebate for that if you work with us. If you go foot first with that, you're much more likely to come to a positive conclusion for both parties. And even better is, like, agents work together all the time on deals. There are more often than not, a lot of agents work together. That's our job, is to work with each other to get deals to close and to make sure sellers are satisfied. If you can be that home or that realtor that always goes the best foot forward in terms of inspections and disclosing everything of relevant news right ahead, you're going to give realtors themselves a lot more peace of mind and confidence in doing a deal with you. So I don't know why you wouldn't get an inspection done just to make sure that you can put the best foot forward. Now, you can make the argument in this market, maybe not, because you don't necessarily have to. But I also made the argument that even in this market, with how hot it is right now, putting your best foot forward and being better than everyone else on the street by doing your due diligence might draw still more competition. More competition is how price points have gotten to the level that they're at, because people are writing competing offers against 4, 5, 6, 10 offers. And that's how we're getting the price points as high as we are, and how the days on market is as low as it is. And giving yourself the best opportunity to have that solution in your favor when you're selling is the best thing you can do. And how you do that is getting your home ready for market.
We're on the same page.
Finally, before I let you go, I'm gonna end on a positive note. Can you give it an example or a story of when a home inspection you were on managed to really help the client? Is there anything that pops into mind of a great story that really just helped someone get the home that they wanted through an inspection?
So, I get asked a lot, would you buy this house? Is this a house that you think is worth the value? And my answer is always the same. It's more, what would you buy the house? How do you feel? Because it really doesn't matter what I feel about the house. It's not my house. I'm reporting what I see, and I'm reporting concerns and conditions that the buyer needs to take into consideration to help make them that decision. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I think. And quite frankly, I never know what the house is valued at, or what the house purchase price is. So I really don't know anyhow. But I would say, I'm trying to think of a situation. There was a mother who had recently separated from her husband, and was, pretty anxious to get out of that environment and find a home that she could call her own and start her life over again. Those kinds of things really make me feel good when I can support somebody to, start a new life and bring some joy back into their life. I consider every home that I inspect where the person has been able to make a clearer decision because of the inspection a success and a feel good for me. I really want to see that buyer has as much information as I can provide to them by way of my knowledge and experience, so that when they finally say this house is for me or it's not for me, that they've used that information in that process. I love what I do. I love the process of relating to clients and helping to educate them with their decision, and it brings me a lot of joy.
Stephen, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sure I'll see you in a week at an inspection.
It sounds great, Jason. Thanks for the interview.
No worries. Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. If you want to get in touch with Stephen, you can reach him at 902-209-3677 or thompsoninspections.ca. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me at 902-220-7357 or jason.paul@kw.com. Thanks again. Bye.